This is a news on Bakhtiar and let's go through the main headlines. Ceasefire talks between the United States and Iran have stalled over key disagreements despite Donald Trump's meeting to make final determination on Iran. Russia claims seizing 10 settlements while Ukraine says it has attacked Russian energy facilities. And Colombians are divided over presidential candidates ahead of Sunday's election. The United States and Iran appear close to extending their ceasefire, but key disagreements are still preventing a final agreement. Both sides say discussions are continuing while people in Tehran remain deeply skeptical about Washington's intentions.
A possible agreement between the United States and Iran remains unfinished despite weeks of negotiations aimed at extending a ceasefire reached in April. U.S. President Donald Trump met his national security team at the White House on Friday to decide whether to approve a draft framework that could extend the truce for another 60 days and allow further talks. However, the meeting ended without a final decision. The United States wants Iran to guarantee it will never develop a nuclear weapon, reopen the Strait of Hormuz to unrestricted shipping, and allow the removal of its stockpile of enriched uranium. Tehran says no agreement has been finalized. Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Baghai said exchanges between the two sides are continuing, but questioned whether Washington would honor any commitments. Iran also insists its nuclear program is for peaceful purposes. In Tehran on Friday, supporters of Iran's leadership expressed little confidence in the negotiations.
If what he is saying is true, it shows that his blockade has failed, and what he had in mind did not happen. He could not overcome us, and in order not to be humiliated any further, he says we are ending the blockade. Now we have to see how truthful he is.
They will definitely not remain committed just like before. We have no hope in this matter either. We will follow our own path.
Our word is our leader's word. The Strait of Hormuz must remain closed. Until our leader announces otherwise, we will say the same.
The ceasefire took effect on April 8th after 40 days of fighting triggered by US and Israeli strikes on Iran. Since then, mediators have been working to secure a broader understanding between the two sides.
The U.S. military said it carried out a strike on a vessel in the Eastern Pacific on Friday, killing 3 people it said were involved in drug trafficking operations. U.S. Southern Command said the operation targeted a boat linked to designated terrorist organizations and released a video of the strike. Russia and Ukraine have exchanged fresh claims of military strikes as concerns grow over possible attacks ahead. Both sides say they have targeted key military infrastructure in recent days. Here's more.
Russia said its forces captured 10 settlements in Ukraine's Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Sumy and Zaporizhzhia regions over the past week. Moscow also reported carrying out 1 large-scale strike and 5 group attacks on Ukrainian military, energy and transport targets, while air defenses downed more than 2,600 Ukrainian drones. Russian President Vladimir Putin said battlefield developments suggest the conflict is moving towards its conclusion, although he said it was impossible to predict when hostilities would end. Putin said recent strikes on Kyiv were retaliation for Ukrainian attacks in the Lugansk region. He also rejected claims that Europe should prepare for war with Russia, while warning that any direct military threat to Russia would be considered a legitimate target. Meanwhile, Ukraine's military said its forces struck several Russian military targets between Thursday night and Friday morning, including the Volgograd oil refinery, supply depots, air defense systems, and drone command centers. Air raid sirens and explosions were reported in Kyiv on Friday, while Ukraine's Air Force said Russia launched multiple missiles into the country later in the day. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said that Russia prepares fresh large-scale attack on Ukraine.
We have intelligence reports indicating that Russia is preparing a new major attack. Please pay attention to air raid warnings and stay safe. Our emergency services are prepared. Air Force and other air defenses will be on duty 24/7 as always.
he urged the United States and European allies to speed up air defense support, saying missile supplies still depend on Washington, and said Ukraine and Romania would strengthen air defense cooperation after a reported Russian drone incident in Romania. Ukraine is expected to use European funding to purchase additional air defense equipment, including Patriot missile systems.
China is once again positioning itself as a voice for diplomacy in the Ukraine conflict. At a recent UN Security Council meeting, China's Deputy Permanent Representative to the UN, Sun Lei, called for dialogue and negotiations, warning that the war continues to escalate and inflict heavy civilian casualties. Beijing has consistently promoted a political settlement to the conflict and has also sought to expand its diplomatic role in other global crises, including tensions in the Middle East. But as China increases its international engagement, questions remain. Is Beijing emerging as a genuine peacemaker, or is it pursuing a strategy designed primarily to advance its own geopolitical interests? To discuss this, we're joined by Jorge Costa Oliveira, speaking to us from Lisbon, Portugal. Mr. Oliveira, welcome and thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Mr. Oliveira, China frequently calls for dialogue and political solutions in conflicts such as Ukraine and the Middle East. How much influence does Beijing actually have over the parties involved, particularly Russia and Iran?
Well, it has a lot of influence. There's no doubt about that. And I think that's acknowledged by all the international major blocs, let's call it like that, from the United States to Europe to the leading members of the non-aligned movement, even if we want to put it aside from the BRICS. The influence is very large, but at the same time, I would say it has two kinds of influence. On the one hand, the strength and the international weight of China itself. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, the fact that both Russia and Iran are quite dependent on supplies of weapons and especially components or dual-use components from China. So China has significant leverage over Russia and Iran if it so wishes to use it.
Mr. Oliveira, we have seen China broker the rapprochement between Saudi Arabia and Iran and become more active diplomatically on global issues. Are these signs that China is transforming into a major conflict resolution power?
Yes, that is a very good example. Mm-hmm. China will continue to try to be an international broker on complicated situations. I don't think that we should expect it to end by the Middle East. Mm-hmm. I think China's influence will gradually increase in other parts of the world. Yes, China will continue to be to try to be a broker of peace, although very careful not to give the idea that its own interests are prevailing upon the international interests on settling the matter.
So, in the case of Ukraine, has China's diplomatic engagement produced any tangible results so far, or has its role remained largely rhetorical?
Well, it has been the call for peace is there. It has not been very effective. It has been very effective on lowering the pressure that China cyclically makes toward with the threat of using of nuclear weapons. China has made very clear that that is completely unacceptable. So to that in that field, it's not rhetorical. In the rest, I mean, today Russia would not have great capability in terms of war or war capability if the supplies of components from China would stop. So China can increase its leverage, and it definitely it's not rhetorical. If it has not increased the pressure on Russia, it's certainly because it did not find that it was on its interest to increase it.
And looking ahead, do you believe China is genuinely seeking to build a more stable international order, or is it primarily using diplomacy to expand its strategic influence and challenge Western leadership?
Well, to be fair, I don't think it is either or. I think it's both things. China definitely wants to increase its international influence. And but on the other hand, China is the best example of what the country can gain with a multilateral order, especially a multilateral economic order. China is the country that benefited most from economic globalization. And in this regard, I understand the question, because so many of us have been used to reason in terms of a zero-game logic. China does not operate on a zero-game logic. It will try to keep the bridges to all the parties that it can, and to increase its leverage and its influence internationally, at the same time that it will defend and uphold an international multilateral order.
Jorge Costa Oliveira, thank you very much for joining us and sharing your insights with our audience. We appreciate your time and expertise. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Thank you. The United States, the United Kingdom and Australia are working together to develop unmanned underwater vehicles under the AUKUS Defense Pact. U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said the project is part of AUKUS Pillar 2. This includes quantum computing, underwater technology, hypersonic systems, artificial intelligence, and cyber technology. Hegseth added that the main aim of the project will focus on developing unmanned underwater vehicles for underwater operations. The aim is to maintain an advantage at sea. AUKUS was formed in 2021 by the United States, the UK and Australia. It is seen as a response to China's growing power in the Indo-Pacific region. China has called the AUKUS Pact dangerous and warned it could increase an arms race in the region. UK Defense Secretary John Healey said the program will help the countries develop new military technologies more quickly. He also said that progress in AUKUS has been slower than expected so far. Head of the World Health Organization Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus has arrived in Bunia in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo on Saturday, as the city remains the epicenter of the country's current Ebola outbreak.
Head of the World Health Organization has arrived in the Democratic Republic of the Congo in the midst of an Ebola outbreak, as the country's health officials say suspected cases have now risen to 1,028, up from 906 the previous day. Health Minister Samuel Roger Kamba told reporters late Friday, confirmed infections stand at 225.
If we go by yesterday's figures, I'll tell you that we're at around 1,000 suspected cases, as I announced. Perhaps 1,028 suspected cases. That's hardly any different from yesterday. But what is new today, and will become even more so, is that with significantly improved laboratory capacity, from tomorrow I will be able to tell you how many cases of Ebola we have. Today I can tell you that with all the tests we have carried out since the start of this outbreak up to today, we have 225 cases of Ebola.
Authorities in Congo, together with neighboring countries, are working urgently to contain the outbreak linked to the rare Bundibugyo strain of Ebola. There is currently no approved vaccine or specific treatment for this strain. Officials say the outbreak is spreading quickly and is putting pressure on response efforts. It is now the third largest Ebola outbreak on record and is developing faster than health teams can fully bring it under control.
More than 1 million Muslim pilgrims have completed this year's Hajj by performing the farewell circuit around the Kaaba in Mecca. Saudi State Television reported that the pilgrimage concluded in a calm and spiritual atmosphere. According to official figures, nearly 1.7 million people took part in this year's Hajj. More than 1.5 million pilgrims came from abroad, while over 1,600,000 joined from within Saudi Arabia. The total was higher than last year, but lower than in 2024. The pilgrimage began on Monday when worshippers arrived in Mina. Authorities introduced extensive security and support measures to ensure the event ran smoothly. During the 6-day pilgrimage, the Muslim faithful gathered at Mount Arafat, spent a night in Muzdalifah, took part in the symbolic stoning of the devil, and finished the Hajj with a farewell circuit. Colombians are preparing for the presidential elections this weekend, with opinion surveys pointing towards a likely runoff as voters remain divided over the country's political future.
With Election Day approaching, voters in Bogotá are weighing competing visions for Colombia's future, with issues ranging from security and the economy to environmental policy dominating public debate. Supporters of right-wing candidate Abelardo de la Espriella say the country needs stronger leadership to tackle crime and reverse the direction taken under the current government.
I am firm for the homeland, Ed's note, referring to right-wing candidate Abelardo de la Espriella's campaign slogan, mainly because I disagree with the current government's ideas and the ideals this government is presenting. Secondly, because of my parents' pensions. They've worked so hard that putting their pensions at risk with the current government, I think, is inconsiderate. Plus, I think what Abelardo de la Espriella says is important, about standing firm against crime and the criminal underworld.
Many of his backers argue that public security and economic stability should be the next government's top priorities.
The right, the left have already ruled. So Colombia urgently needs a change from these traditional parties. I hope, and most Colombians trust, that this country will change so that social investment comes, and so that we provide security and apply a firm hand. This country needs a firm hand.
Others are backing candidates aligned with President Gustavo Petro's political movement, pointing to environmental protection and social policies as key concerns.
My vote goes to candidate Ivan Cepeda, mainly because I like the environment. My country is a world engine of biodiversity, and I think this candidate is important because he thinks about the environment and he opposes fracking compared to other candidates.
Yet not all Colombians are convinced by the political choices on offer. Some voters say years of unfulfilled promises have left them increasingly disillusioned with the political system. Opinion polls suggest no candidate is likely to secure an outright majority in the first round, and setting the stage for what could be a closely contested runoff later this month.
Amazon's internet satellite network has expanded with the launch of 29 new spacecraft. United Launch Alliance's Atlas V rocket successfully deployed 29 internet satellites for Amazon's Leo 7 mission into orbit. The launch proceeded as planned, with all systems functioning normally. The satellites were released in stages once they reached orbit. According to the company, all 29 satellites were successfully deployed. The satellites are part of Amazon's project to provide broadband internet to underserved regions around the world. The company plans to build a global constellation of more than 3,000 satellites.
Booster to closed loop control.
Investors are watching the return of the so-called bond vigilantes as rising yields put pressure on governments. The 5% level is emerging as a key psychological threshold in global bond markets. It comes as concerns grow over fiscal stability in major economies. Our report has more.
Why does 5% matter so much?
Markets continue to have a little bit of weakness here.
At first, it sounds small, but in global finance, 5% can shake governments. An opinion article by Kaiser Nawab for the News Opinion section drew attention to one important number: the yield on the 30-year US Treasury bond. That yield recently crossed 5%. This is not just a Wall Street figure. US Treasury bonds are treated as one of the safest assets in the world. So when their long-term yield rises, it becomes a signal. Borrowing is getting more expensive. Debt is harder to manage. And investors are demanding more return to lend money to governments.
30-year above 5%, almost 5.2% today. That should make people a little bit jittery.
For the United States, this matters because its debt is already huge, and interest payments are now taking a larger share of the budget.
everything in the market is priced on some premise of a risk-free rate.
For the rest of the world, it matters because US rates influence global borrowing costs. When America pays more to borrow, many other countries may also face higher costs, especially developing economies that borrow in dollars. This is why 5% is more than a number. It is a warning. The age of cheap money may be ending, and bond markets are telling governments something simple: spend carefully, because lenders are watching.
Let's turn to the top developments making headlines across the region. Russia has recalled its ambassador from Armenia to Moscow for consultations over Yerevan's growing ties with the European Union. The Russian Foreign Ministry announced the move on Friday, saying Armenia's efforts to deepen cooperation with the EU are undermining collaboration within the Eurasian Economic Union. The consultations will take place in Moscow as relations between the two countries face renewed strain. The leaders of Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan have proposed holding a referendum in Armenia on whether Yerevan should join the European Union or remain in the Eurasian Economic Union. A Kremlin statement said the decision should be made by Armenian citizens through a vote, adding that the referendum should be held as soon as possible. The leaders also warned that close ties with the EU could pose economic risks for EAEU member states. Armenia's move towards Europe has increased tensions with Moscow in recent months. Yerevan said it wants to maintain cooperation within the EAEU, while also expanding relations with the European Union. Kyrgyz President Sadyr Japarov has addressed the Supreme Eurasian Economic Council meeting in Astana. In his speech, he highlighted the importance of strengthening cooperation within the Eurasian Economic Union and advancing joint technological initiatives.
Kyrgyz President Sadyr Japarov attended the Supreme Eurasian Economic Council meeting in Astana, Kazakhstan. Addressing leaders of member and observer states of the Eurasian Economic Union, Japarov said global competitiveness is no longer determined solely by access to technology, but also by the speed of its implementation. He noted that the Eurasian Economic Union could become an important platform for technological cooperation, joint innovation, and the development of new growth sectors. Japarov also stressed the importance of developing artificial intelligence within the organization, saying it could give a strong boost to economic and technological progress. He further underlined the need for the swift implementation of newly signed trade agreements and the simplification of trade procedures among member states.
The United States has reaffirmed its support for the diversification of Turkmenistan's natural gas exports through Trans-Caspian routes. According to a statement from the U.S. State Department, Secretary of State Marco Rubio met Turkmenistan's Foreign Minister Rashid Meredov in Washington, D.C. During the meeting, Rubio underscored the importance of expanding Turkmenistan's access to international energy markets via Trans-Caspian export routes and expressed strong U.S. support for the initiative. The two sides also reviewed progress on recent commercial agreements and discussed opportunities to broaden cooperation in the fields of energy, security and trade. The U.S. side welcomed the progress made through recent commercial deals. Uzbekistan has signed investment and export agreements worth more than $3.5 billion with Chinese companies aimed at supporting major infrastructure and development projects across the capital. A news correspondent in Tashkent brings us more.
Tashkent has secured more than $3.5 billion in investment and export agreements during the Uzbek-Chinese Inter-Regional Forum in Xi'an. According to the city administration, the deals cover transport, urban infrastructure, construction and industrial projects. The largest allocations include $1 billion for road infrastructure, new bus rapid transit lanes and overpasses, a further $1 billion for transport and social infrastructure, and $500 million for residential developments in renovation areas. Other projects include $400 million for drainage, irrigation and rainwater management systems, $150 million each for decorative stone and ceramic production, $100 million for the development of branded 24-hour streets, and $50 million for smart waste sorting equipment. The Yangiavlot industrial zone will also see $130 million in cooperation agreement. Export deals were also signed covering Uzbek jewelry products worth $150 million, along with cotton yarn and silver concentrate. Officials say the project will be financed by the Chinese side without the use of state budget funds or government guarantees, supporting the long-term development of the capital. It is Sivil Rajab reporting from Tashkent, Uzbekistan A News.
Kazakhstan is considering several new oil export routes, including the Baku-Supsa pipeline. The head of Kazakhstan's Ministry of Energy, Yerlan Akenjanov, said that no official proposal has yet been made by Azerbaijan on this issue, and no formal negotiations have taken place between the sides. I cannot provide a tariff. There have been no official talks with the Azerbaijani side, he said. At the same time, Azerbaijan and Georgia agreed in May 2026 to resume operations of the Baku-Supsa pipeline. The Baku-Supsa pipeline was commissioned in 1999 and is used to transport oil from the Azeri Chirag-Guneshli fields. The pipeline is 837 kilometers long and can carry more than 7 million tons of oil per year. The transportation through the route was halted in spring 2022. This concludes our news update for the hour. Thank you for your time and stay tuned for more updates.